When a loyal dog disrupts a funeral with frantic barks at the coffin, it unveils a dark truth buried deeper than the grave. The story begins in a solemn and dimly lit church, where sunlight filters through ornate stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns onto the wooden pews. The atmosphere is heavy with grief as mourners, dressed in black, fill the rows in silent mourning. At the altar, a polished oak coffin rests prominently, symbolizing the finality of the moment. Father Michael, a man in his 50s, stands at the pulpit wearing traditional vestments. His hands tremble slightly, his voice carrying the weight of sorrow as he recites the final rites. Among the mourners sits James, a man in his 30s, accompanied by his loyal German shepherd, Max. The dog sits calmly beside him, though his sharp gaze betrays an acute awareness of the surroundings. As Father Michael's voice wavers during the eulogy, Max's ears suddenly perk up. He emits a low growl, his attention locked on the coffin. James, sensing something amiss, whispers a command to quiet the dog, but Max's growl soon escalates into loud, aggressive barking. The congregation stirs uneasily, and an elderly man rises to his feet, demanding to know why the dog is barking at the coffin. Father Michael grows visibly nervous, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Stuttering, he suggests taking a brief recess. But before anyone can act, Max breaks free from James's grip and charges toward the coffin, barking frantically. The congregation reacts with confusion and fear as Father Michael stumbles backward, accidentally knocking over a candle stand in his haste to step away. The chaotic scene crescendos as Father Michael retreats toward the side door, leaving the stunned congregation behind. The church vestibule. Moments later, James, determined to understand what just happened, follows Father Michael into the quiet vestibule. The priest is slumped against a wall, his head buried in his hands, overwhelmed by guilt. James presses him for answers, his voice tinged with frustration and concern. Father Michael, speaking in barely a whisper, reveals a cryptic truth. Dogs know, James. They always know. The statement leaves James bewildered, and he demands clarification. Reluctantly, Father Michael begins to explain, his voice heavy with regret and shame. He confesses that he was present on the night of Thomas's death, and that he had the power to intervene but chose not to. The church office. The narrative shifts to a haunting flashback of the night in question. Father Michael is seated in his office, engrossed in reading. His attention is drawn to the sight of Thomas stumbling through the parking lot, visibly intoxicated. Moments later, Thomas burst into the office, his disheveled appearance and erratic behavior signaling deep distress. Through slurred words, Thomas confesses a terrible truth. As a teacher, he had been abusing children for years. His confession is both an act of desperation and a plea for absolution. Father Michael, horrified by the revelation, struggles to process the magnitude of Thomas's crimes. Before the priest can respond, Thomas clutches his chest and collapses, suffering a fatal heart attack. In the present-day voiceover, Father Michael admits that instead of calling for help, he let Thomas die. He rationalized his inaction as divine intervention, believing that God had taken Thomas's life to protect future victims. The scene transitions back to the present, in the quiet, dimly lit vestibule of the church. James, determined to uncover the truth, stands face to face with Father Michael. The priest appears broken, slumped against the wall with his head buried in his trembling hands. His once composed demeanor has completely unraveled, revealing the immense burden he has been carrying. James, his voice a mixture of confusion and urgency, demands answers. "Father, what's going on? Why did you rush out like that?" His question cuts through the silence, but Father Michael hesitates, as though grappling with whether to reveal the painful truth. Finally, in a near whisper, he mutters, "Dogs know, James. They always know." The cryptic statement leaves James momentarily baffled. He presses further, his tone now tinged with frustration. "Know what? What are you talking about?" Father Michael's gaze meets James's for the first time, his eyes filled with guilt and anguish. With a shaky breath, he begins to confess. The priest reveals that he was present the night Thomas, the man in the coffin, died. He admits, with great difficulty, that he could have intervened to save him but chose not to. His words are weighed down with remorse as he recounts his inaction. "I watched him die, James," he says, his voice cracking under the weight of the memory. "I told myself it was God's will that he was protecting innocent children." James's face contorts in horror and disbelief. The revelation strikes him like a blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. When he finally speaks, his voice is laced with both condemnation and incredulity. "You didn't call for help? You just stood there and let him die?" Father Michael, now visibly trembling, collapses into a chair, his head hung low. Tears streamed down his face as he tries to justify his actions. He explains that Thomas had come to him that night, confessing unspeakable crimes against children. The priest had been paralyzed by the gravity of the confession, and when Thomas suddenly suffered a heart attack, he chose to do nothing. In his mind, he rationalized that letting Thomas die was an act of divine intervention, a way to stop him from harming others. The scene is emotionally charged, with Father Michael's raw confession revealing the moral complexity of his actions. James's shock and outrage are palpable as he processes the priest's choices. The tension in the vestibule is thick, underscoring the weight of the sins that Father Michael has carried in silence for so long. This pivotal moment sets the stage for the unfolding drama, as both men grapple with the implications of the priest's confession. The moral ambiguity leaves the audience questioning the boundaries of justice, guilt, and redemption. The church interior, moments later. Father Michael and James return to the main hall of the church. Max is still barking at the coffin, his behavior stirring unease among the mourners. Father Michael, with newfound resolve, steps forward to address the congregation. He confesses his role in Thomas's death, revealing the truth about the man's dark past and his failure to act with compassion or justice. The congregation reacts with a mix of shock, anger, and sorrow. An elderly woman stands and tearfully admits that her granddaughter was one of Thomas's students, her words sparking murmurs among the mourners. As the truth emerges, Max finally grows quiet, lying down as if his task is complete. The once tense atmosphere is now thick with a somber realization of the complex moral failures at play. The church steps later. As the service concludes, the mourners leave the church, their expressions a mix of grief and contemplation. James stands on the steps with Max, watching as Father Michael speaks with two police officers. The priest's confession has set into motion a chain of events that will ensure accountability for the past. James crouches to pet Max, his voice soft with gratitude and admiration. "Good boy," he says. "You knew, didn't you? You could sense the guilt." Max looks up at James, his steady gaze conveying an almost human understanding. Together, they watch as Father Michael is escorted to a police car, his actions now subject to the law. As the car drives away, James reflects aloud. Sometimes it takes a dog to reveal the truth about men. With those final words, the story closes on a poignant note, underscoring the themes of guilt, redemption, and the unwavering loyalty of a dog.